In the distant future, the year 1990X, White Wolf, the creators of Vampire the Masquerade, the only game studio that ever came close to dethroning D&D as the premier tabletop roleplay experience, would release a brand new sci-fi action RPG called Aeon. And then, the Aeon Flux guys sued them for $1 bajillion, so they changed the name to Trinity. In the 22nd century, humanity has ventured to the stars. Yet, amid the wonders of this new age, mankind faces many dangers from without and within. Alien races, fractious colonies, contending governments, ruthless corporations, and aberrant mutations all vie for supremacy. At the center of this conflict stands a new breed of humans. Men and women with psychic powers whose actions will determine mankind's ultimate fate. Then, a year after the RPG, White Wolf released Trinity Battleground, the first and only miniature game they would ever make. And that is what we are going to be talking about today! I got my hands on this game because my dad moved recently, and he was trying to get rid of some stuff, and this was one of the things in the collection that was probably not worth selling. This game, or the setting of Trinity, maybe I should say, is actually the third game, or third setting, in a greater Trinity verse. I have a slight amount of experience with the second game called Aberrant, which takes place in modern-ish times. I played a handful of sessions of Aberrant, but at the time I was actually completely unaware that it was a part of a bigger multiverse. I thought it was just a standalone White Wolf superhero game, but we'll get back to that. Anyway, these hills are kinda horrible, but I love them, and I think it's what all hills should look like. Here's the rulebook, about half of which is lore, of which I read about 2 pages before I gave up. And there's these pictures of what I can only assume are holograms of faces, but they are very unserious looking, and I'm curious to what extent that this was either intentional or they just thought it was funny, so they decided to keep it in. Then here is a terrifyingly foreboding amount of chits, which bodes really ill for there being any chance of this being an easy-to-learn game. Alright, let's get to the good stuff, the miniatures. Their material is very similar to Citadel Fine Cast Resin. All the usual suspects are here. There's some minor little air bubbles and some mold slippage, but the details are all very pleasingly crisp. The sculptor of these minis is none other than the legend himself, Mr. Bob Naismith, the man responsible for the very first OG Space Marine sculpt. And there is nothing I love more than this retro heroic scale style look with the roided out heads and the pork sausage fingers. I could spend all day looking at minis in this style. That having been said, these designs in particular don't really inspire me. The Legionnaires look like kinda relatively generic space soldiers that could exist in any sci-fi setting ever. And the Aberrants pique my imagination a little bit more, but I'm inclined to give them a very similar review of neat but meh. Okay, I'm going to slap a very quick paint job on these minis, and I'm going to give a very brief overview of my shallow understanding of the lore of the Trinityverse while I do that. The year is 1998. The space station Galatea is orbiting Earth, and it's filled with science, and then it explodes, and then science reigns all over humanity, which causes people to gain superpowers. Except the space station story is actually a cover-up for the real cause of the superheroes, which is because of this important guy who is doing a slightly related but technically separate science thing. But anyway, we got superheroes running around, and we call them Novas. There's this process they call erupting that can happen to some people, and it's triggered by experiencing trauma, and then it causes a special gland in your brain to turn on, and then you get to use this radiation called quantum to do superpowers. But using it too much causes a buildup of radiation called a taint, which if you get enough of that, then you turn into an evil mutant called an aberrant. And there's this group, and they're called the Aeon Society, and they're basically the Illuminati, but they're mostly good guys. And they got a whole bunch of timey-wimey stuff going on, and their founder comes back, and he's like, the Aberrants are gonna destroy the world, so we need to either sterilize all the Novas or stop them, or do something to prevent that from happening. And then there's a Magneto guy, and his name is Divis Mal, and he's the important guy from earlier that did the science thing. And he's made all the superheroes, and he's the OG first Nova, and he's like, Novas are the coolest thing ever, we should have more of them. And he's like, how dare you try to control us and use your human laws against us, and you guys are the real evil ones, you're trying to sterilize us. And he's like, now we're gonna enslave all of you because humans are pathetic and we are the next step in evolution. And he's like, let's just have a big war. And then there's a big war, and it's like the worst war ever. And then China is like, that's it, we're gonna nuke everyone and everything, and then everybody's gonna lose unless you guys go away. So then the Aberrants are like, fine, and then they fly off to space. So then humanity starts recovering, and they start making alien friends, and then the aliens teach them how to become psychics, and then they basically have superpowers again, but now it doesn't turn them into mutants. And then the Aberrants return, and then they're now 100% mutated into super freaky monsters. And then there's another big war, and then that war is the same war that this miniature game covers. And then there's also a third game, or maybe a first game, depending on how you want to look at it, and it's called Adventure. And it takes place back in 20s, 30s time. And it covers the beginning of the Aeon Society for Gentlemen, which was founded by this dude, Max Mercer, and he's important because Divis Mal is gay for him. And then the Aeon Society is the through line throughout the 3 games. Anyway, this game takes place after a science thing happens called the Hammersmith Incident, and it's a science thing that explodes, and it gives everyone slight superpowers. You know, they can't laser beam a city in half or whatever, but they get just enough powers to turn them into hyper-competent pulp heroes. Except for Max Mercer, he does get superpowers, he gets time travel powers, so he gets sent on a whole flatland journey. And then Divis Mal also gets real superpowers. And by the time we get back to Trinity Future Times, it is left unclear what the ultimate fate of Divis Mal is. Thus concludes my potentially inaccurate summary of the Trinity verse. Here is my quick Joe opinion on the Trinity verse. Starting with Adventure, unfortunately, the pulp genre just doesn't really do much for me. As for Trinity, I appreciate sci-fi, but regarding this one in particular, there just aren't really any factions or conflicts or characters that I particularly identify with. But I actually really kinda love Aberrant. I'm definitely biased because it's easily the one that I know the most about, but the whole central tension really works for me. The question of what do we do about Novas? Do we try to control them? And to what extent? And how would you even go about doing it? I'm curious to find out what all the various factions' answer to this question is. It hits my preferred Goldilocks zone that I like in a superhero setting. It's not all-encompassingly edgy and cynical where everyone is a bastard. There's plenty of room for Novas to be classic, upstanding superheroes that sincerely want to help people. This is supposed to be humanity's golden age in the Trinityverse, but it ain't no Saturday morning cartoon. There's plenty of grime and grit to give the conflicts a little bit more bite and make the consequences feel a little bit more real and impactful. Overall, the tone feels very reminiscent of Kingdom Come to me, which I would not be surprised if there was a direct influence because the comic came out like just right before they would have started working on Aberrant. So I want to talk about something that might seem kind of innocuous, but I think is representative of some of the underlying fundamental issues with this miniature game, and that is the prevalence of face tattoos, which the Scions use to indicate which legion they are part of and their rank. And it wasn't until I actually flipped to this page that I even realized that these were supposed to be face tattoos. I thought they were all goggles or visors or something like that. And the fact that there exists any kind of expectation for people to freehand all these face tattoos on all their dudes just seems like the kind of thing that you would never do if you were designing this universe to be a miniature game. This has got to be one of the hardest freehands to conceivably pull off. They don't even read as face tattoos on the perfect professional box art photos. And maybe this is kind of a nitpicky, get good kind of a problem, but it's the first to signal that I picked up on that this miniature game was likely an afterthought rather than a thoroughly planned out project. Let's talk about the rules of this wargame. It is pretty much a one-for-one translation of the Trinity RPG combat rules, but with some slight differences. Like your charisma, manipulation, and appearance are all consolidated into a single social stat, which they do find uses for, but I still can't help but feel like it comes across as a little bit forced to me. If you find yourself using a set of mechanics known as the storyteller system for your tactical wargame, you are setting yourself up for an uphill game design battle. But in short, it's a D10 system. When you shoot someone, you roll a number of D10s equal to the appropriate stat. 7 pluses are successes. If you hit, you roll that many dice plus your weapon's damage and then deal damage equal to your successes. Then the target soaks an amount of damage based on a roll of their stamina plus their armor. If you've ever played any World of Darkness games, that should all seem very familiar to you. The upside is that if you know how to play the Trinity RPG, then you already know how to play the miniature game. The downside is that if you're already happy with the RPG, there's not a whole lot that Battleground can offer you. Here are some rules that I found interesting. The recommended board size is 6 by 4 feet, and that is a size that's approaching too big for even full army scale war games. For a little squad skirmish game like this, that is just an insane board size. Excuse me, garçon, what's this encumbrance doing in my miniature war game? Here's an idea that I actually really like, which is the explosive barrels. I think there's some really interesting things you could do with that. And I did look it up, and unfortunately, it does not appear as though you can use telekinesis to throw the explosive barrels. Let's take a look at the sample armies, specifically the abilities column. In Mordheim, I already find myself losing track of things even when I only have like a skill or a spell or two. Here, multiple of your guys are starting with 6+ keywords. That's just a lot of stuff to keep track of. I suspect if I were to actually play this game, I'd be operating at approximately 4.5 RFM. Alright, well, that's just about everything that I had. The rights for Trinity Battleground are owned today by a company called Faceless Publishing. They have digital files available for all the game pieces, so that's an option. Regarding the review, I was biased towards leaning negative since I was trying to find reasons to explain why the game didn't work, but I do think it has some cool stuff going on. I think there's something very appealing about the amount of customization, and I think for a starter set, it's got a very respectable amount of replayability. I think, unfortunately, Warhammer did it both earlier and in a more clever way. But Aberrant is really, really cool, and Onyx Path is doing new stuff with it, so I hope that's good. It would be really funny if they did a Trinity Battleground 2nd edition, but instead of making any like major overhauls or anything, they just replaced the dice rolling system with the story path system. Anyway, I don't have anything else to say. That's it. The end. Goodbye. Thank you for watching.